If you've been hearing that the real estate market is slowing down, that buyers have all the negotiating power now, or maybe even that home prices are falling here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the July numbers tell a much more interesting story. We have more homes available. Homes are generally taking longer to sell, but prices are still holding surprisingly strong in many areas. And depending on whether you're looking in Gulfport, Biloxi, Long Beach, Ocean Springs, Bay St. Louis, or somewhere else along the coast, your experience could look very different. So let's break down the July 2026 Mississippi Gulf Coast housing market and, more importantly, what these numbers actually mean for you. Hi, I'm Claire Savage with Southern Magnolia Realty, and I help buyers and sellers navigate real estate here along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Every month, I like to look beyond just whether prices went up or down because there's a lot more happening underneath those numbers. For July, we're going to take a look at inventory, prices, the days on market, closed sales, and even how much negotiating room buyers may actually have. And then I'll break down some of the individual cities because this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all single market. So starting with the overall Gulf Coast MLS numbers. The average sold price in July was $304,619. Homes were taken an average of about 68 days on market to close. And while we were sitting at approximately 4.6 months worth of inventory. So there were 1,635 closed sales, 2,232 new listings, and a total of 6,645 homes available for sale across the Gulf Coast MLS. That relationship between new listings and closed sales is pretty important. We had considerably more homes coming onto the market than homes were closing, which means buyers are getting more choices. But that does not automatically mean that sellers are suddenly desperate. Homes across the Gulf Coast were still selling for an average of 96.9% of their list price. So while there may be more room for negotiation than we saw during like the extremely competitive markets a few years ago, properly priced homes are still selling relatively close to asking price and relatively quickly. On average, it took about 10 showings for homes to go pending, with roughly 3 showings per listing per month. So buyers are out there, they're just being a little bit more selective. Now, this gets much more interesting when we break it down by county. In Harrison County, the average sold price was around $310,603, with homes averaging 68 days on market and approximately 4.7 months of inventory. The detailed Harrison County report also shows how the market has compared to last year. Active inventory increased compared with July of 2025, while the average price of homes sold increased significantly. So we have more homes competing for buyers, but that has not necessarily translated into falling sales prices. That's an important distinction for the sellers to keep in mind. You may still be able to achieve a strong price, but you may need more patience and a much stronger pricing and marketing strategy than we would have needed just a couple of years ago. Now, looking at Jackson County, the average sold price in that county snapshot was about $183,717 with 78 days on market and 6.4 months of inventory. The more detailed county report shows that July active inventory was up compared with last year. Interestingly, the average sales price in that report was up almost 10% compared to 2025. So again, more inventory does not automatically equal falling prices. Now, Jackson County does have more supply relative to demand though, which may create opportunities for buyers, especially when a property's been sitting on the market for a while. Then we have Hancock County, where the average sold price was approximately $315,627. Homes there averaged 89 days on market with approximately 6.6 months of current inventory. That gives buyers considerably more selection and potentially more negotiating leverage than in some neighboring areas. And in Stone County, the average sales price was approximately $259,000 with 77 days on market and about 4.4 months of inventory. So even county to county, conditions change pretty dramatically. Now, let's get even more local. We'll start with Gulfport. The average sold price in Gulfport was $264,805. Homes there averaged 73 days on market, and inventory was around 4.3 months. Homes were selling for approximately 97.6% of their list price. There were 125 closed sales compared with 187 new listings. So buyers gained some additional choices during the month. Now move just down the coast to Biloxi, and Biloxi's average sold price came in considerably higher at $353,179. Homes were averaging 61 days on market with approximately 5.6 months of inventory. They were also selling at roughly 97.6% of list price. So even with more than 5 months of inventory, sellers are still getting relatively close to asking price when the homes sell. And then we have Long Beach, which has some of the strongest numbers in the entire group. The average sold price was $341,068, but what really jumps out to me is the average days on market, just 52 days. Long Beach also has only about 3.6 months of inventory, making it one of the tighter markets among the areas that we're looking at. Homes were selling for approximately 97.1% of list price. For sellers in Long Beach, that's still a pretty healthy market. All right, now let's talk about Pass Christian. The average sold price there was $507,667, with the highest of the cities included in the report. But homes were averaging 89 days on market, and they've got about 6.3 months worth of inventory. So that tells us something important. A higher average price does not necessarily mean that homes are selling faster. There's fewer transactions in Pass Christian, and the higher end market can naturally behave very differently. Next, there is Bay St. Louis, where the average sold price was $428,333, but the average days on market was 128 days, the highest among the cities in this group. Inventory was also relatively high at 7.1 months of inventory. So for buyers looking in Bay St. Louis, that might mean that you have more time to make decisions and potentially more room to negotiate depending on the property. For sellers, it means pricing correctly from the beginning becomes extremely important. Because when we have buyers with 7 months worth of inventory to choose from, they can afford to be picky. Now, moving east to Ocean Springs, it continues to stand out. The average sold price there was $383,546, with 67 days on market and only 4.2 months of inventory. Homes here were selling for approximately 97.7% of their list price, one of the strongest list to sold ratios in the entire group. Ocean Springs also recorded 88 closed sales during the period represented in this market snapshot for the month of July. Then we have D'Iberville, where the average sold price was $210,500. Homes average 61 days on market, and they have about 5 months worth of inventory. Then we go farther east into Moss Point, which had an average sold price of $234,444 and only 51 days on market. They have about 4 months worth of inventory. Now, Pascagoula is a little different, and this is where the drop comes. An average price of $136,000, and homes were taking almost 92 days to sell. They only have about 3.8 months worth of inventory, but the list to sale ratio is 92.9%. So that suggests pricing and property condition can play a very significant role in what the sellers ultimately receive. And finally, we're going to go north. Wiggins had an average sold price of $108,000 with only 25 days on market. Now, it has a very small number of closed sales, just 3 for the whole month. So I can't take a lot of suggestions about like what the average and the conclusions from that average, but it's an example of why like we never want to look at any one statistic in isolation. So overall, what does this mean if you're thinking about buying? First of all, you've got more choices than buyers had during the extremely competitive market of just a few years ago. You may have more time to look at a property, compare options, request repairs, negotiate the price, or ask the seller for concession. But I wouldn't necessarily assume that every seller is just going to accept a dramatically lower offer than where they're listed at. Across many of our Gulf Coast markets, the homes are still selling around 97% of the list price. The biggest opportunity may actually be in identifying like those properties that have been sitting longer than average. If the average in the area is 60 or 70 days and a home's been on the market for 120 or 150 days, that's something that you may want to take a look at very closely for like my buyers or you as a buyer. Like, why hasn't it sold? Was it originally overpriced? Has it had a lot of price reductions? Is the seller more motivated now than they were when they first put it on the market? That's where market data becomes like a negotiation tool. And knowing and being prepared with these data points is where it helps you out. So if you're selling, July's numbers are still not bad news. The prices are still relatively strong in many parts of the coast, but the days of throwing a house on the market at just whatever price you want and expecting multiple offers immediately are way behind us now. Buyers have options, and when they have options, overpriced homes become easier to skip. Your first few weeks on the market matter more than any other time. Your pricing, the photography, the presentation, the condition, the marketing, the accessibility for showings, all of those things work together. The goal should not be simply to just list the home. It should be to position your home as one of the best choices available in its price range. Now, if I had to summarize the July 2026 Mississippi Gulf Coast market in one sentence, I would say this: we're seeing more balance, but we're not seeing one single market. Long Beach at 3.6 months of inventory behaves way differently from Bay St. Louis at 7.1. A $200,000 home behaves very differently from a $600,000 home. Ocean Springs behaves differently from Pascagoula. And even two homes sitting 5 minutes apart can have completely different levels of demand depending on price, condition, location, flood zone, insurance costs, and the competition currently on the market. So that's why national headlines can only tell you so much. Real estate is incredibly local. And here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, sometimes it's local right down to the neighborhood. So if you're thinking about buying or selling anywhere here along the coast, and you want to know more and what these numbers mean specifically for you, your price range, your neighborhood, or your situation, reach out to me. I'm Claire Savage with Southern Magnolia Realty, and I would be happy to help you look at the actual numbers and build a strategy around today's market for you. And if you enjoyed these local market updates, subscribe to the channel, because I'll be breaking down the numbers here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast market every month, although occasionally I do miss some. Apologize for that. And I'll also have you tips for buying, selling, moving to, and living here on the Gulf Coast. So thank you today for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Now, these market statistics reflect July 2026 MLS data that I pulled from MLS United. The information is deemed reliable, but it's not guaranteed. Market conditions vary by location, property type, price range, and individual property. So please reach out if you have questions about your specific property or neighborhood. Till next time.